Let's bring you all the latest from China as Beijing is dealing with a second wave of infections as a new cluster of cases have now put 500,000 people under lockdown in China's capital. China imposed a strict lockdown in a province surrounding the capital to contain this fresh cluster. Anshan County, which is located about 150 kilometers from Beijing, will be fully enclosed and controlled. According to the county's epidemic prevention task force, only one person from each family will be allowed to go out once a day to purchase necessities such as food and medicine. These are the same strict measures that were imposed in Wuhan at the height of the pandemic earlier this year. The outbreak was first detected in Beijing's Xinfadi wholesale food market. The market, which supplies most of the city's fresh produce, sparked concerns over the safety of the food supply chain. Nearly a third of the cases have been linked to one beef and mutton section in the market. These new cases have prompted fears of a resurgence of the virus in China. But the government is dealing with this second wave on a war footing. China has mass tested all market restaurant workers and delivery couriers over the past 2 weeks. The capital city has collected samples of a record 8.3 million people, also completing nucleic acid testing of 7.7 million. City officials have also urged people not to leave Beijing. Schools in Beijing have been closed and residential compounds have been locked down to curb the spread. For more details, let's go across to our correspondent Patrick Falk, who's joining us live from Beijing at this hour. Patrick, a very good morning to you. Now, how is the country tackling the crisis at a time when it's also inundated with floods? How bad is the second wave?
Well, good morning to you. It's, by all accounts, really getting better and better by the day. The latest figures, as we've seen, show that there have only been 12 new cases in China across the country in the last 24 hours. That will be a positive sign for authorities indeed. 5 of those 12 were imported cases. 7 of them, the ones that were locally infected cases, were all in the capital where we have had this second wave, the second outbreak, if you like. But that number is still a decline compared to what we've seen in previous days. It has more or less hovered around that figure for around a week now. And as you say, there's been mass testing going on in the capital. No stone is being left unturned, if you like. They've already tested around a third of Beijing's population of 22 million people, and that is still continuing, which is remarkable in many ways. As we've said many times before, when it comes to the capital, China's capital, the political heart of the country, the restrictions and testing and so on and so forth is perhaps taken all that more seriously here. But certainly the sense of fear that there was a week ago when there was still worry that this outbreak might spread further and, get more serious, that's largely gone away. And so far, there have been just over 300 cases reported in Beijing.
300 cases reported in Beijing. Now, that also brings me to the fact that, it was the Xinfadi food market which was the epicenter in Beijing. Having said that, the market has also, sparked fresh concerns over the food safety chain. There are new concerns regarding the supply chain, and considering that China is a meat-consuming country, how are people being made aware in terms of consumption of meat?
Well, there have certainly been concerns. As we know, there was a lot of worry about salmon imports into the country, and also China has been calling on some countries to try and guarantee that what they're exporting to China is COVID-free, although many countries have been resistant to that and said that they can't really manage to do that. This whole issue of salmon has perhaps been debunked by some experts, or they've said it's unlikely, at least, given the fact that we haven't seen this sort of outbreak elsewhere in the world. They are suggesting, therefore, that it's more likely that it was a human-to-human transmission which brought this second wave in Beijing, although that hasn't been verified, and it's still not known what the actual source of this second outbreak is. That in itself is a bit of a concern, although, as I say, the situation in Beijing certainly seems stable for now, and people are getting about their normal business, and generally business is getting on as usual.
Right, Patrick, we've seen it in Germany, Seoul, Italy, and now China in terms of clusters that caused the so-called second wave. How does one define and tackle a second wave of infections, especially when there is no vaccine or cure ready yet?
Well, I couldn't tell you from a professional perspective on that, but certainly countries may be looking to China and the way that it's dealt with the outbreak ever since it hit Wuhan. I mean, we have had very strict guidelines on movement, and certainly it seems amazing to many people in China that some countries are still having this debate over face masks. That's been out of the question here in China. Certainly, it's an absolute must to get around unless you're in an open space like this. And of course, in some ways, the second wave has been an important reminder not to let your guard down, because the virus doesn't seem to be able to be eradicated easily at all. And so, perhaps a lot of countries are going to be looking at the model that China has put in place. And, this second wave has been a very good example of China, now that it knows how to handle the outbreak, having been through everything that it's been through over the past several months. And, when, again, you talk about there being only just over 300 cases reported in Beijing, despite the second wave, is really quite remarkable when we're talking about, countries like the US having 2.5 million cases today.
And perhaps China is going to be better prepared this time, considering they're back to tracing, testing and isolating those suspected carriers. We'll keep coming back to you, Patrick, for more. Thank you so much for joining us.